Next on stage is maybe like a world premiere, because this great book is only released a few weeks ago in the US. It will be in Europe very soon. And even the title is just as short as brilliant can be, A Proper Drink. And it's all about Mr. Robert Simonson, who wrote down the untold story of how a band of bartenders saved the civilized drinking world. Now, how about that as a starting point for a panel talk? So can I please have on stage the author, Mr. Robert Simonson, Mr. Jörg Meyer, Mr. Philip Duff, and we're waiting for a mystery guest who will be a little later.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, you will notice that we are 3 people up here, not 4. The glorious Mr. Charles Schuman will be making an appearance sometime during the events. We hope. We certainly hope. I have a lot of questions for him, and I can't get the answers until he gets here. Hey, let's sit down. Yes. So we're here to talk about the modern mixology movement, which at this point is rather long in the tooth. It's about 25, 30 years old, depending on how you look at it. And it was old enough that I decided that maybe there ought to be a book about it before we all get too many drinks in us and we forget all the history and nobody remembers for the rest of time. So I spent the last 3 years interviewing a lot of people, including these 2 august gentlemen sitting next to me, about their memories of the cocktail renaissance, revival, whatever you want to call it, and then putting it between 2 covers. This is the book. It's called A Proper Drink. It came out on September 30th. Here we're, one of the most interesting things and one of the most fascinating and actually miraculous things about the cocktail movement is that it kind of happens simultaneously in several countries and continents at once, without much communication between those different communities. It happened in the US, in San Francisco and New York. It happened in the UK, primarily in London. It also happened in Australia, mainly in Melbourne, and then later in Sydney, but it also happened here in Germany. And for this talk, we're going to concentrate on how it came to be in Germany that the cocktail was rediscovered, wonderful bars open, and everybody began to drink better, the way that people had drunk before Prohibition, although actually it was never that way in Germany before. No, it was a new thing here completely. So if anyone has a drink, cheers. Or Prost. So to tackle this subject, I've invited...
Charles is coming. Charles.
Charles Schuman,
ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Charles Schuman.
As soon as the brownies are served, Charles turns up.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Schuman.
It's so difficult to find.
As I told you, he was on the wrong stage.
No,
Wir haben es geändert dieses Jahr.
It was not on the wrong stage.
All right, we're a full party here now. I'm glad Charles is here because all the first questions were for him. Charles, there's a seminar. Okay. All right.
We are starting.
So
yes.
the word, I was about to do introductions. Anyway, so to talk about what our subject today, I've invited 3 of the most opinionated people in the cocktail business. I invited them on purpose. That way, I don't have to talk so much. You can do all the talking. Yeah. But seriously, we have a wealth of experience and knowledge on this panel. The word legend is thrown around very liberally in this community, but it does actually apply to the man here in the middle, Charles Schuman. There are a few cocktail godfathers throughout the world, really maybe only 2 or 3, and he is the man here in Germany, as well as kind of greater Europe. because of the influence of the bar that he opened in Munich in 1982, Schuman's American cocktail bar. Charles Schuman. To Charles's right, we have Jörg Meyer, who owns Le Lion in Hamburg, an influential gentleman in his own right, and a ebullient evangelist of cocktails throughout Germany and Europe, and evangelist of day drinking of late.
I will teach you today.
Yes, and he well represents the younger generation that came up in Germany in the shadow of Charles's achievements. And then to my right here, one of the most knowledgeable, witty, experienced, and well-traveled gentlemen in the cocktail set, Philip Duff. He is a consultant, he is a speaker, he's a lecturer, he is a bar owner, he's everything. He's the kind of person that makes my job very hard because I don't know how to describe him when I meet, laymen from the public. And Philip Duff. So here we are. So to understand how we got here and where we are now, we have to go back and figure out where we were. So let's talk about what the drinking culture was in Germany in the 1970s and the 1980s, Charles. When you were first a bartender and then a bar owner, I know that you bartended before you opened your bar. You bartended at Harry's. Maybe you could talk about what did Germans drink?
Okay, I started working in Harry's bar 5 years before we opened Schuman's. So I was really 5 years in Harry's bar, and I did it. I told so many times that we had no cocktail culture is not the right word. We had no cocktails outside of hotels. We had a couple of bartenders, not a couple, I suppose we had bartenders in hotels with good knowledge of cocktails. It reminds me a little bit on the culture of art of cocktails in Japan, because there's so many old bartenders working behind the bar, and they never change the cocktail list. They have one cocktail list from the first till the end of her career. It was like this. Okay, maybe it's an insult if you compare Japanese bar culture with the German bar culture. But I know really many old bartenders in New York, in Tokyo. They are older than me, and they're working in bars. They work really every day. And as I started working in Harry's bar, we had a very small list of cocktails. Bill Deck, who opened the Harry's bar in Munich, had a certain knowledge of cocktails. He was born in Pennsylvania, I think. Pennsylvania is German, Pennsylvania is German,
Well,
more
there
or
are
less.
people of German descent, yes.
And he came to Munich and worked for AFN radio station and opened this bar. And I think it was very difficult for him. The first years he opened the bar in 1993. He opened, no, 1983. Oh, 73.
73, we're going way back.
1973, okay. He opened his bar, and in my age, it's difficult to remember. And he told me once it took 2 years, and after 2 years the bar was working. But it was always difficult in Germany, always difficult to get people in early in the evening. We had not at all after work drinkers, early barflies which came early after or immediately after the work to bars. So Bill had really did a lot of work to get them in, but I don't know if he really had success. As we opened, or as Schumann's opened, 1982, it was quite impossible to have people after work inside the bar. So when we talk about cocktails we did, Bill had a little school book written 20 cocktails. Cocktails everybody knew. It started from martini to Manhattans to old fashions, but we never changed the spirits. We did all the Manhattans with the same vermouth. We did all the whiskey sours with the same whiskey. We did all the gin drinks, the fizzes, with the same gin. And even in Schuman's bar, the first 15 years, we changed the cocktail list or menu, but this was the time of really sweet drinks. Pina coladas, flying kangaroos, banana daiquiris with every fruit, and all this stuff we sold. And I honestly think that Jörg knows it maybe better than me, the last 15 years, it changed completely.
I agree.
What do you say?
I agree.
Oh, yeah, Jörg, tell us you visited Schuman's early on when you were a younger man, and it had an influence on you. Can you tell, what were your first impressions of the bar and the kind of drinks that they were serving, and what kind of impact did they have on you?
Honestly, I don't know. I was only one time in the old Schumann's.
One time maybe enough.
One time, and honestly, the books impressed me more because I had his 3 books in my home library. There was not a library, just 10 books, but I really read them all the time. So when I was there, was a catering. I was only there in the early evening because people told me you will not get in. You're too young, and it's cool, and they don't. I looked like a bullshitter. I was coming from the countryside. I don't know how. I was very insecure. I just started my apprenticeship in a big city, and all of a sudden I was in Munich, and I wanted to visit. And I don't know who was working. I don't remember that, but I was just like coming in the early evening. I think you opened at 6, 5 when you opened.
We opened at
5. So I tried to be as early as possible.
Saturday was closed.
Yeah. That was the second time I wanted to go there. Saturday was closed. Yeah. And then there was EB sitting outside drinking beer. Yeah. No, but I was there and I was just impressed by all these people in white jackets. I was just, shutting up, ordered a drink, sitting there, watched them, be impressed, paid, and gone. I was totally...
I sometimes try to remember. I think we made really lousy drinks sometimes.
Well, don't we all?
I don't know.
I remember...
The only what's really funny when I read about cocktail history in the last 20 or 30 years, that in America they started very late to work. I don't know if it is true, you can tell me, with not prepared juices, prepared drinks. This we didn't from the beginning. We had very less juices, but we always worked with fresh juices. And I think there is no secret behind, and I cannot understand that people talk about that, because for me it's normal that you not work with prepared juices.
So at Schuman's from the very beginning you had fresh juices. Was that the case at Harry's as well?
I even don't know. I don't know. I don't remember, really. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Right. Philip, you're from Ireland. You began your career in the UK as a bartender, but very soon you hopped over to the continent and you ran bars in Holland, not very far from here. Can you talk about some of your first experiences traveling to Germany and your impressions of the cocktail scene here, the few cocktail bars there were?
Yeah, absolutely. I did begin my career in Ireland, but taking the advice of James Joyce, what you need to be a successful Irishman is skill and cunning and exile. So I left. I lived in Holland for 17 years until 2012, so right next door. I had heard about this person called Charles Schuman, because back then there was no internet, and you would go into every new bookstore you could find, and you would just look for cocktail books, any cocktail books, and you would buy them. So quickly you had a library full of like the worst shit you could imagine. But every now and then, maybe 1 out of 6, the book would be pure gold. And Charles was one of them. Because we didn't have people to explain to us, it was difficult to understand the Savoy cocktail book, which you also saw everywhere. But you're looking at it, what is this stuff? Like aperitif? All right. But Charles's book was written with a voice, and it sounded like somebody was explaining things to you, and it sounded like you might be able to make these drinks. That said, I really began coming to Germany when Mixology magazine was founded, because I think I've been to almost all the BCBs. I saw the early rumblings of the magazine, then all the tremendous community that was created online, the discussion boards, and recently, of course, it switched to social media. So I started coming to Germany, and as I was saying before when we were having a chat off stage, Robert, I think the difference between how the culture developed in Germany and everywhere else in Europe is Mixology magazine. And I'm not just saying it because I'm here. Mixology's a remarkable resource. When there was no internet, Mixology magazine was here. It was your internet. It was in German. That's quite important. And the way the culture developed here, for instance, compared to how it developed next door in France, the difference is France is closer to England. They were much more influenced by London culture, and they didn't really have a magazine like Mixology for as long as you've had a magazine like Mixology. So even when I started coming here, I saw some of the same rumblings that I would see several years later in the US when things started getting going.
Jörg, was Mixology magazine a help to you as you were coming up in the bar world?
I remember the first issue was I was owning a restaurant with a bar with a partner. And there was the first issue they sent for free. And it blew my mind. And I immediately signed up for, they had an online forum. It's deleted now. It's a shame because it's lots of history. And it was really cool. And the second issue, they promoted their own bar. They opened a bar in Berlin which was called Salzbar. And I did a really shameful tweet on the online community. Said, you are bullshitters, you promote your own product, it's shit. And we started to fight each other. But after this, we became friends. So, and I really was a big fan of what they do, and still are. And it was a big impact for Germany.
The existence of a magazine can make a big difference in the way that cocktail culture evolves. The US never really had one. England had a few, including Klaas. Australia got one, Australian Bartender, and that certainly helped make that community gel. So it makes a big difference. It's interesting and important to remember how media and the way information was dispensed progressed over the last 25 years. In the early years of the cocktail renaissance, people had to do what Philip described. They had to find the old books, most of which were out of print, in order to relearn their profession and relearn the old cocktails. It's another reason why Charles Schuman was important. He began publishing cocktail books. Was it the 80s or the 90s you began publishing?
I even don't know, but the first cocktail book, as we did the first cocktail books, it was always literature, because I called the books always Drinks and Stories, because I thought it's very important that you know not the story behind a cocktail, because this is mostly wrong, who invented this or who invented this, no. Drinking people which liked bar, which went to bars, and from the first moment on, I had a graphic designer, Matai, who made the first bar books are sold because the graphics was so good, and the drinks. Okay, the second bar book I did. The first was a black one with drinks and stories. It was like a bar menu. The second I did for a friend who had two. It's a sad story. Who had 2 months more to live, and he was he was always very close to the Caribbean, and he asked me to make a tropical bar book to support him. And I said to him, I've never been in the Caribbean. I know nothing about the Caribbean. I know nothing about the drinks. How can I make a book about Caribbean drinks? So we found a couple of old books, and so I started to invent Caribbean drinks. And we had very ridiculous names like, okay, I said, okay, they go with the beer outside drinks. So we made German names like Schwermatrose, Leichtmatrose. I don't. Yeah, but it's very Caribbean drinks. So they're really strong Caribbean drinks. And I had a bar guest from Jamaica. This was the only man who was able to drink and to smoke, but very strong stuff he smoked. And we invented for him a drink, Loftus Special, but he came from Jamaica. It was very close to Bob Marley. But when I I had one bar book which influenced me most. This was not Savoy bar book. This was really David Embury. I found this book in London, and I loved it from the first moment. He had almost the same ideas I had always, and I still have. And I think I took a lot of him.
The Fine Art of Mixing Drinks. For those who don't know David Embury, he was an American lawyer who really liked drinking, and so he published a cocktail book in the 40s, and it was called The Fine Art of Mixing Drinks, and it's become one of the Bibles of the cocktail movement. It's interesting that you say that, Charles, because it was also influential with Dick Bradsell, who was the godfather of the British scene, so Embury's reach is really quite wide. Yeah.
At the same time, but you knew it, because you started mostly at the same time to make books and new menus.
Right. Phil Donahue over here. Just a little bit more, but before we leave Charles's books, his second book, I believe, the American Bar book, it was printed in English, and that had an impact in America. It fell into the hands of a lot of bartenders who would become influential, including Sasha Petrasky, who founded Milk and Honey. He was a big fan of that book. And other ways that Schuman's bar had influences across the world in weird ways. As I interviewed people for this book, I found this out. There's a man named Matthew Bax, who lived in Munich for a while, and he went to your bar. And when he went back to Melbourne, he decided to open his own cocktail bar called De Room, so he was influenced by you. And there was a bar in New York called Pravda, a very famous vodka bar, and they stole the white jackets that your bartenders wore. They wanted the same white jackets, so they designed their jackets after...
Eugene brought it to New York.
Yes, yes, Eugene Massett, who was one of your early bartenders.
And Eugene brought it to New York.
Now I have two Negronis. Things are going well up here.
Yeah, he worked in which bar Eugene worked first? For McNally, I think he worked.
He worked for Pravda.
Yeah.
And then the people who worked early at Pravda eventually formed Employees Only, so you can sort of, and I believe the Employees Only people have a special connection to your bar. Going back to the way media traveled, the cocktail renaissance couldn't have happened as quickly as it did without the dawning of the internet. This is how bartenders connected with each other from all over the world. And I know that was important in your story, Jörg, that while you were alone, I believe the story was you went to your parents for a while, you were taking care of your parents, and while you were there you were extremely bored, so you went online and you found cocktail forums that were run by Robert Hess and Ted Hay and people like that. Describe that experience and how that influenced your ideas about cocktails.
So in 2004, we operated a restaurant with a bar, and I sold that with my partner. And at this time, my father was very ill, so I decided to help out, as my parents, they have also a business, hospitality, very different, no bar, very countryside, weddings, very, it's not very urban. And I decided to go there and help them for a year. But it was very boring, as you told. You know, it was closing at 8 o'clock in the evening or 9, so I was on my own, and I didn't want to team up with the people there. So I decided to check the internet, because I was already 10 years doing a bar in Hamburg, or a restaurant in a bar. So I was really in love with it, and I read all his books and a few more. And then there was a time around 2004 or 5 where lots of online forum. I think the first one was Drink Boy. And there was cocktail forum from Ted Haig at AOL.
Yeah, Ted Hay was on
That was the first,
AOL.
and then there was Drink Boy.
And then Drink Boy with Robert
And that was
Hess.
quite interesting, because it's all the people who are here today, like, or not, maybe not here, but Dave Groff, Andre Sanders, David Wondrich. They were all, I didn't know who they were. They were just responding to the posts. And I didn't know who they were, and it was quite interesting to read. We had some, I was just interested in history of drinks. So I spent every night, I don't know, 6 or 7 hours in the internet, writing and answering, and because it was more interesting than the day job.
So you learned about all these names, and then eventually you met the people.
Yes,
Yes.
they had quite funny names. I didn't know who they were. But
Well, funny names are tradition in the cocktail industry, I find.
no, in the forums, not,
Oh,
not their
right.
real names, not their real names.
Oh, the screen names, got it. And I also know you also took occasional trips to London and New York. How did those influence you?
Yes, a few times I mean, London and New York at this time were the center, next to Munich, of the cocktail revolution, whatever. There were things going on, so I tried to fly there as often as possible on my own expenses and just check these names I read in these forums, visit them and make my notes and just enjoy them and get inspired. So I have to say that there was one New York guy I started to read I was really a stalker. That was Sasha Petraske, which you can never stalk because he was never online. He changed his email every time. You couldn't take him. He didn't have a...
Zero social media presence.
Zero. But because he was in New York, so everybody was writing about him. So you can easily find every day a new story about this bar, which I really liked to death. And I took many things from that to when we created De Lyon, because I just liked the way they did it. It was a bit like his books, very classy, very focused on classic cocktails. But what was more important for me, and that was also more important on his books, were not the drinks. I like the stories and the style. I think the things I read with you was you want to create a cool place in a very special way, and I think that was more important for me. And Sasha did the same with all this rules and all this, what he set up and how he did it. And I was more interested in how to do a cool space, to do a space which is really... He was a gentleman, yeah? I liked him, yeah.
When I interviewed you for the book, you told me that you thought London had a big influence on the German cocktail scene, London. You're from London. Would you agree with that? You've seen the German scene, you've seen the London scene. Would you agree that there was an influence there?
Well, absolutely, because the daddy of them all is Class magazine, RIP. But this magazine came out at just the right time. Dick Bradsell had finally started working in the more popular public bars. The Atlantic Bar and Grill opened. Vanity Fair magazine went from New York to London. They did a whole episode on London. They invented the word Cool Britannia. English bartenders started to be proud of English products, which is why they began using things like English gin and elderflower syrup. And of course, the German scene was very influenced by that, because before you could get Mixology magazine, maybe somebody would send you a copy of Class magazine, or you'd be in London and somebody would tell you about this cool bar. But you're still all, in the early days, you're still pre-internet back then. So it was back in the days, like Jörg's story, you'd go to a bar and you just hope there was somebody there that you could like watch, you know, and maybe if you were very lucky, they might introduce themselves or explain something. That was kind of how it happened. This, wasn't happening. So it was absolutely vital that, you know, London was there. And back then, plane tickets were also more expensive because the internet hadn't kicked in. So it was an investment to go there.
One question, but we never were really very close to London. I don't know why, because at this time I never traveled. Now, the last 4 years, I travel too much. when I went to London, I don't remember the years. I think these times were really influenced by Italian bartenders.
Italian bartenders.
Duke Hotel, Langham Hotel, all these Italian, Savoy, all these hotels and bars had Italian bar chefs. And I suppose they influenced really, and they built up the great, and now the last years, the bartenders from Czechoslovakia, from the east of Europe. I think they influenced the London. Are they really, okay, Red and Pretzel, they are British, but the most influence, I suppose, came from Italy.
Well, that was interesting. I was at a bar called Buck and Breck last night, and I was talking to the staff, and it seemed that every member of the staff had come from a different country. It was really an international staff, and it made me think of the London scene, which is a very international scene. Would you two say that the German bartending scene is also somewhat international, meaning people come from all over?
I honestly say I'm really a little upset because yesterday bartenders spoke about international bar scene, and the German bar scene is very important for not only for Germany. It started maybe in Frankfurt, I don't know, but the Frankfurt bartenders the bartenders from Frankfurt started very early in Biancalani, and so they really worked for the bar. Schuman's was always too crowded, and I've been always too nice, and so it was difficult for us. But this bartender, the German, and now I suppose even Berlin is very important, and so I'm upset that one bar is under the first 50 bars in the world. This is really not serious. When Buck and Breck has 49 or 50, this is shit, and we should really battle against that, because it's not true. We have so many good bars in Germany.
There are many good bars that are not on that list. We have to remember that. When you opened Le Lion in Hamburg, the city had never seen anything like that. Was
You're
that
invited. Well, there's an ice train. We can go now.
Yes, I mean, for the way you described it, it seemed like a labor of love. You were just going to open the kind of bar that you wanted. You didn't really care whether it succeeded or not, right?
Yeah, that's what we do. I mean, you fulfill your dream when you have a work for 10 years, and at one point you say, now I want to do it the way I like it. Mm-hmm. And
right.
Yeah.
So, and the model of the bar, you've been open about it, was Milk and Honey. Is that correct?
Yes and no. It has many influence. So first of all, in his books were things like, when you want to open a classic bar, you should do it next to the big theaters, the grand hotels, which I really like the idea. So I wanted to have a bar downtown. I found that in your book somewhere. There's a theme where to open a bar. And because Hamburg has the size, it's different from Berlin. Berlin is so huge, you don't have a center. But Hamburg is a little bit smaller, we have a center. And I wanted to have this international possibility to attach lots of international guests. So, but then there was, I mean, Milk and Honey, I like the style. So, I mean, what was a little bit strange was, this, I mean, they made this real speakeasy. You have to get the number. It was a kind of game. You have to know a guy who knows the number. They always change the telephone number. You have to do a reservation. I didn't want to do that, but we had the same idea of keeping an eye on the atmosphere, control the audience. So we have a closed door. You have to ring a bell, and yeah, that was I liked many things from Milk and Honey, and yeah, also the way they treated ice and the very simple drinks. I really like that.
And another example of how the cocktail scene is international and influences come from all kinds of unexpected directions. The famous drink you created, the Gin Basil Smash, you based on the Whiskey Smash, which is a drink that you first tried at Pegu Club in New York and was invented by Dale DeGraff. So with Pegu Club.
No, Dale was the teacher of...
Pego Club was started by Audrey Saunders, but the drink, the Whiskey Smash, was Dale's.
yeah,
Isn't
there
that
was
right?
the foundation.
That's right. He was actually downstairs making whiskey smashes, and it made me think of this. Yeah. So this is a question for any of you. How would you say the German cocktail scene, in the way that it grew or the way that it is now, is different than any other cocktail scene in the world?
Well, that's a hard question. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not? Okay.
Yeah, let a German
It's
should
not-
speak
it's-
first.
It's not a hard question because I think clients are educated now, more educated, all over in the world. Bartenders know much more than we knew before, so it's normal that we changed a lot of. You are connected with all over the world, and if you are open and not working only for yourself, then there are many bartenders which work open-minded, and so we make fantastic drinks. We make really fantastic drinks. Maybe the drinks, I don't know. So many bars in Germany, maybe they are a little bit too strong, but it's better to have strong drinks than lousy drinks.
So if you want to tweet that, now we have a quote from Charles Schuman. It's better to have strong drinks than lousy drinks. I think, at the risk of repeating myself, Mixology magazine and the BCB has been a big influence. The first ever bar Convent was very small. It wouldn't be much bigger than this room, it seemed. And it grew, that's the difference, very slowly, because the organizers wouldn't allow a big company to come in with a disco system and dancing girls and energy drinks, although that was very easy money, of course. It grew very slowly, and the BCB actually taught drinks companies how to connect with bartenders who are interested in cocktails and culture and good bars. And the other thing that's a major influence is Germany's really big. So you get really big country budgets for alcohol brands. So they can spend really a lot of money, they can do a lot of investment, a lot of training in BCB, in competitions, in other things. In other countries like Belgium or Holland or Luxembourg, the budgets are much, much smaller. So they won't do anything, or it'll be very small scale. So this sheer scale of Germany, plus having a bar Convent that grew so organically, supported by a great magazine, has made a massive difference. We're now at one of the most sophisticated bar cultures in the world, right here.
Jörg, you've done a number of things over the years to help propagate the cocktail community here in Germany. You and Stephen Berg founded one of the early blogs, the Bitters blog, that helped connect people around the nation. And you also formed a group of sorts, the Traveling Mixologists, you and some other German bartenders, and you had jackets, and you travel around and do
White
events,
jackets.
and not just in Germany, I believe you went to London and other places. I imagine that helped to spread the word of what was going on in Germany, did it?
I think it was just by circumstance at the right time. It was the time when BCB started. Gonzalo from Buck and Breck, we know each other very well. So he was in the legendary Victoria bar in Berlin, and we always chatted because I wanted to open the bar in Hamburg. I wanted to bring him over. So we decided to do a night in Hamburg, which we call the Gintastic Night. And we want to just mix gin drinks. And the days I was boring in Lower Saxony, I found a very interesting website which was called, I think it was called the Dry Martini Place or something like that. It was operated by Jared Brown and Anastasia Miller.
Yes.
And I always read the blog because they just went out every night for a martini in New York and wrote about it. And I really liked it. And they had a paywall button which says, if you donate money, we promise to drink it. So I donated $10 because I liked what I read. Jared Brown sent me back an email, said, hey, you are the first guy donated, thank you. Who are you? I said, cool.
He'll never forget you.
The fun fact was, he was writing from an Apple ID, which was Jared, I don't know, at mac.com or something like that. And at this time, Macintosh invented a hard drive in the internet. So if you have the name, you can just go at, I don't know what the name was, la disk, and then you enter the name and you can see what these people have on their virtual hard disk if they didn't secure it. I, as a hacker, did this. And there was scans from the New York Library, which was called The Traveling Mixologist about gin. So I copied all the documents on my laptop. And then I wrote him, thanks, I donate you another $10 because I just stole your document from your online hard disk. And he was like, what the fuck did I do? I don't know, there's no password, you can just copy it. So I had this book, Traveling Mixologist, which I really liked. It was a misspelling, with, I think it was one L, because Americans write traveling different. All those people say, oh, it's wrong. You say, no, it's old American. And Traveling Mixologist, so I read this book. It was all about gin only. There was things like the Cosmopolitan made with gin from 1934. I was like, that's cool. So in Gonzalo and me, we read these old scans, and we decided to make a gin night. So I founded this, we called it, and then I made, because I was influenced by this gentleman here, I just wanted to work in white jackets once in my life. So I made this white jacket and I made this logo on it. And Stefan Berg did the logo. I think Stefan Berg did the logo. First we did the night, and after the night we created this. And we created the Traveling Mixologist. And then we invited Stefan Berg for the next round. There was a second night. Then we invited Bastian Heuser for the fourth night. Then there was Tom Yaksha. So there were more and more German bartenders coming in. We were 6. And then there was the first bar show in London again. And people saw it somewhere on Facebook, and I met a guy called Xavier Padovani. I never met him before. And at the end of the show, because he brought us to the events, he spent 3 days with us and he paid all the expenses. I think he's quite cool. He was doing a gin called Hendrix in the beginning. So I gave him a jacket. I said, you're cool, you get a jacket. And then Angus Winchester, I don't know, at this time I didn't know him so much. He was contacting me, hey, why he got the jacket? So Angus Winchester was just jealous. I said, next time when you come, you get a jacket. And then we invited more and more international people, and all of a sudden it became very, very famous. And the only rule was, we don't work for brands, we just work for fun, which at the end made it impossible because all of the guys were working for brands. Me also started to do some events with brands, and then we decided to just stop it because we don't want to work for brands. We just did it for the fun of it and for the old drinks. Well, but it became very popular for 4 years.
Start. We're starting to run out of time, so I want to just ask the 3 of you gentlemen a little question about the future. It's the question that everybody always asks me, and I never know the answer. Where, particularly for Germany, where do you think the cocktail community, the cocktail scene, the cocktail culture is headed? Where is it going? Why don't you, well, let's start with you.
I don't know. So I think, I mean, it's very hard to, everybody should do what he wants. Just what is great, what has changed, what is the difference between when he opened a bar 30 years ago and us? In the beginning, you were important. Not you as a person, because I love what you write, but journalists. Journalists made bars famous. That was the old days. Without a journalist, he couldn't get fame. Because even if he, attached so many people, that was not enough. You needed a multiplicator, which was journalists or other people who made bars famous. So today we still have the great stories about La Floridita and all these famous bars. It was just by circumstance because for several reasons there were journalists drinking at this bar and they made them famous because they write great articles. But nowadays we have this. And now you can go to Karlsruhe, where just opened amazing bars. You can go everywhere. And you talk directly to the customer, and it's about how to find the 500 or the 1,000 people who love what you do. And it's not, you don't have to do the big thing, but you just have to find the right people who make you pay the invoice and have lots of fun. And nowadays it's very, very easy, in my opinion, because of this, because now we can communicate directly. I still like great articles and I still like great writers, and it's still a beautiful help for the community if somebody with a great network writes about you. But if you do it well and you're not a bullshitter, you can do it on your own. And this is, I think, a major change, and which I really like.
Charles, where do you think it's going?
Okay, I think we never should stop drinking, huh? This is important. When everybody stops drinking, so the bar and the cocktail culture is over. When more and more people drinking smoothies, the bar history is over. When this, for me, stopping smoking in bars, it's a fault. Okay, in Berlin it's allowed to smoke in bars. I think you can decide if you want to go in a bar where smokers are inside. But when it's forbidden to drink in bars, then I have really no answer what's happened with the culture, but I don't think so. I think we always will, drinking is, the life is for sure easier when you drink, but sometimes. Yeah. I drink too much coffee. I shouldn't, because I'm not feeling bad when I drink coffee, and I'm not feeling nervous when I drink coffee. But when I drink alcohol or cocktails, I feel sometimes tired. So you have to know what you can really drink, and how long you can drink, and how much you can drink. Then your life is, as I said already, really easier to stand.
I think the future for Germany is the same as in a lot of different countries. It's bartender-owned bars. Bartenders who start their own bars have a solid knowledge of the drinks, and then you can learn the business. Because when somebody starts a bar and later on they decide to learn about cocktails, it can work, but it's more difficult, especially if the bar has already survived a little bit. You tend to think, yeah, I don't really need to go down that road. But if you start a bar knowing about cocktails, with a love of cocktails and spirits in general, I haven't lived in Europe for about 5 years now, so I'm not sure how it is in Germany. But I live in America, and a lot of people think, cocktails in America, it's over, it's done with. It hasn't even started. In a string of about 12 cities, usually around the coast, and a couple inland like Chicago, there are amazing cocktails to be had, many, many bars. The other roughly 200 million Americans live in cities where there are not many great bars. And I think you can get a great drink in 10 or 12 German cities now in many different bars, but there's still many, many millions of Germans who need a good cocktail. And I think the future is bartenders who open bars to supply those cocktails.
Just one more word about the book before we close out. The original idea was to have some books here for sale. That proved not to be possible. So if you are really interested in cocktail history and want to find out how this all came about, I'm sure there is some way on the internet that this book can be had. So it's called The Proper Drink. And thank you all for coming, and thank you for the panelists, Jörg, Charles, Philip. This has been a pleasure. Thank you.